Nothing feels better for me in my role with beEmboldened than to be able to connect someone with a person who I know is gonna care for them well, is gonna love them well, is gonna have integrity in what they're doing. Hello, and welcome to Reclamation Podcast, a beEmboldened initiative. I am Naomi. I am the founder and executive director at BE, and today we're going to talk about our mentoring services, including some of those nuances that are really important as a mentor serving in this area of religious abuse. To do this, I've invited one of our mentors, Anna, to join me. And in case you're unfamiliar with her, I want to begin by giving you an introduction. Anna holds a Master's of Arts in Biblical Studies from Reformed Theological Seminary. She's under supervision for her license as a clinical pastoral therapist in the state of Tennessee, and she's near completion of a Master of Science in the Psychology of Coercive Control from the University of Salford, Manchester in the UK. That is anticipated to be completed in 2024. Her areas of specialty include Christian apologetics, neurochemistry, cults and new religions, PTSD and dissociative disorders in religious environments, and practical theology and culturally taboo subjects. She speaks internationally on the intersection of psychology and theology, as well as the anatomy of persuasion. And for those of you who are new to beEmboldened, a quick intro to us as well. We exist for those impacted by religious trauma by providing support for the prevention of victimization and revictimization. We desire to create a safe space to ask questions and to begin to heal and rebuild. You can learn more and support this work and engage in the resources we offer, including the upcoming release of our very first digital course on rebuilding after religious abuse. You can do that all by visiting beEmboldened.com. This episode is sponsored by the lovely Whitehaven Coffee Roasters. They are a small batch specialty coffee roaster focused on connecting with people over an exceptional cup of coffee, and they are just incredible people. Please go to whitehavenroasters.com. You just type live free into the note box at checkout, and beEmboldened will receive a donation of 15% of your order. Thank you so much for your support. We really cannot do what we do without you partnering with us. We appreciate you being here. Jumping in, I want to talk about the difficulties surrounding personal experience with cult material and academic knowledge about cult material, kind of the difference between those two. So, oftentimes, individuals who reach out to us at beEmboldened, they're hoping to connect with someone who has this personal experience with religious abuse, in addition to the academic knowledge component. Personally, I find this to be really understandable, having come out of that experience myself. So I get that people are looking for that, and it's something that I look for in team members myself, depending on their position. I think some positions it connects more, others maybe it doesn't as much. So, Anna, I wanted to start with, what is your belief and how a mentor who has dealt personally with a damaging group would respond to a client versus one who has not had a similar experience?
I suspect one of the things that would happen, so I have personal experience, and so I kind of jump to colleagues that I've had who maybe don't have personal experience in this stuff. It's
Mhm.
actually rare. Most of us in this field do have personal experience, which is
Mhm.
why we're in the field.
Yeah.
I suspect that'll change as time goes on and we have more interested in this topic and who want to study it. But for now, actually, it's been my experience that most of us actually do have personal experience.
Mhm.
But the difference I think would be is there's an element in the scriptures that talk about having soft eyes as wisdom
Mhm.
and age move through a human life, right? And
Mhm.
one of the things with the experience of having actually been in an environment that was coercive, and you know what it did to your brain, and you know how it affected the people around you, and you know how helpless you really were, and how different it is to actually be in that environment
Mhm.
versus how the surrounding culture interprets what's happening,
Mhm.
gives you softer eyes. You go different places first with your questions. And
Mhm.
I've noticed that's really huge. You talk
Mhm.
way more about what it felt like when you were trapped first, as opposed to how can we clinically assess what's going on in your head.
Mhm.
And I suspect I would say that's the primary feature that I've noticed in clinicians and mentors and those who do this on a regular basis. They just go somewhere completely differently as in the introductory phase. And you can pick up on the fact that actually this person's been there.
Mm. It makes me think of the word companioning and
Mhm.
how there's sort of this natural companioning that happens, which is really just being present with someone and kind
Yeah.
of walking alongside. And there's sort of this natural tendency of, yeah, I get that. Whether we necessarily say it or not, maybe that's dependent on the situation. But yes, we have this knowing at that point of the suffering the person is experiencing, the confusion that they're experiencing, the losses they're experiencing. And so absolutely I notice actually in my conversations with people, oh, this is kind of popping out to me and I'll ask about it and, "Oh, wow, yeah, interesting." I don't know that someone would necessarily catch some of those nuances as easily if they had not experienced it themselves. So,
Yes.
I think there can be as much as I'm like, "Well, gosh, I had to go through all that to be able to do this." I don't know. I mean, there's a real gift in having gone through it to be able to then come alongside others. So, it's something that makes me thankful. I think many of us say this when we have suffered in whatever way we have suffered is when we then find purpose in it. We feel that, gosh, I wouldn't necessarily want to do it again, but I have a sense of gratitude for what I'm now able to offer because of it.
Yeah, and the idea that you can begin the conversation with somebody who's already made the journey with you through that introductory period. You don't have to teach a course on coercive control to the
Right.
person in front of you before they can assess you and help you and answer questions. And I'm sure there's a level of relief there that is really nice. At least there is for me when I don't have
Mhm.
to explain what I do before I actually get to talk about what I do.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I hear that quite a bit too, as I imagine you do, of like, "Okay, you just kinda get my context, I don't necessarily have to explain to you." And here's what can feel challenging, I think, from the client side of it, having been in that chair as well. Sometimes we can feel like, we're already maybe struggling with feeling like we're quote unquote crazy because we've been gaslit and manipulated. And so we can feel like, gosh, like, eh, do I really understand this? Like, was it my fault? Was it really their fault? And so things can feel very confusing. And we're trying to get a handle on what even happened to me. Like, what was that? And now what do I do with it? And so when we have to explain our context again to a support professional, it can be challenging to do that when we're already feeling confused and we're already wondering, like, what was me and what wasn't me. And then it's like, okay, but now I also have to convince you that it wasn't me, but I'm feeling insecure maybe about that. So it just all gets kind of jumbled in there. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, and the patient way with which we're less goal oriented and more about making sure the person is able to identify their identity versus their cult
Mm,
identity, because that's the more important part than
mhm,
the goal of actually treating the PTSD, because
mm,
we know that's a feature of that particular type of control. Is
mm,
that you really don't have control, and so you need to feel and be able to isolate what you do have control over and be
mm.
reminded of it, and that's not necessarily something you're gonna get in a classic, like, CBT setting.
Right, right. At the same time, one of my big dreams and goals when I first came forward with my story and I was thinking about, okay, what's the vision for this organization? Like, why am I creating a 501(c)(3) versus an LLC? Why am I creating a nonprofit organization versus just kind of doing my own thing or, different options that are available? So, when I was thinking all of that through, one of my big dreams was to help incredible support professionals who are already out there doing amazing work become more of experts in this area so that they can add this to an area of expertise and be able to serve people well. Because beEmboldened's not going to be able to actually serve everyone directly if we're talking about like one on one services. Now, through different resources and groups and curriculums and digital courses, things like that, of course, it can go out internationally as it is. But that one on one can be really, really significant for someone in their healing and rebuilding journey. So with this, I don't want to discourage that if someone doesn't have the personal experience that, they're not going to be able to do this well. So I want to touch on that too, because, and I'm curious kind of your take on this. So At beEmboldened, we offer consulting services. We do that to help support people and help them become more nuanced in this area. But what other suggestions would you have for a professional who does not have this personal experience with a coercive group, but they're wanting to gain that deeper understanding so that they can serve clients better? Because inevitably, they're just showing up in people's offices. We show up and this is what we have to share. And then, okay, well, now how do I do this while this person's here? We relationally connect. It's a good fit in so many ways, but
Yes. So, and there's a lot of huge positives about not having experience in a cult group too, because you're going to see features of control that the other person may not have even identified yet.
mm,
And that can be really powerful and wonderful and liberating. So I would never want to discourage a clinician who has not had personal experience from taking on the role of a support for someone who is in a cult group or coming out of it. Well, let's just say high control group in general. So that can
mm,
include domestic violence and trafficking and all those things.
mm,
We have a significant amount of research and a significant force of clinicians, and these are licensed clinicians studying and doing research specifically on the phenomenon of coercive control and writing legislation across the globe to help
mm,
in litigation and to help um, representatives understand that this is a different scenario than
mm,
what you would expect from a PTSD response. Same thing for first responders. That's part of why I'm part of that clinical group doing the research masters at the University of Salford. So do not, if you're a clinician and you need more information, do not hesitate because it is out there, and it's peer reviewed. It's wonderful. That's the type
mm,
of stuff that you want to be reading. So if you're interested, that really is out there. But past that, being able to isolate and be open to the potential for working outside of the boxes you're normally working in when
mm,
you're trained as a professional, and to feel comfortable being really customized with each individual.
mm,
And that's really important. We don't want to cookie cutter this at all. The 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 the, the need to really take into account the personal aspects and the specifics of each individual's stories, and not simply blanket, this is just PTSD. It's a huge mistake, but it's also something that can help you as a clinician, if you know that going in, to not accidentally make that mistake and to have other clinicians who you can collaborate with to understand why that is.
mm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Which of these are you? How do you describe yourself in relation to these two options, either the mentor with a personal experience or a mentor without?
Yes, I don't know. The answer is I don't know how to answer that question, because the truth is I have a significant experience personally way before I was ever in
Mhm,
any of the clinical formats with the Jehovah's Witnesses. Very long set of years going back and forth and experiencing coercion and seeing it with loved ones and all those things. The hard part is that I wasn't actually physically baptized. I was working with elders all the way up to the governing body and have been for years, but I was never a baptized Jehovah's Witness. So I was always an outsider in
okay.
the cult, but I was also an insider based on
Mhm,
people who are outside. So I don't know quite how to categorize me, except to say that I had all of these experiences before I ever knew anything about clinical psychology,
mhm,
um, or theology for that matter. I learned about it in a coercive environment, and that's how I realized that it was. And so that makes it different. All I know to do is tell my story. I try to keep it on a one-to-one basis because there's some complications with,
mhm,
as getting real detailed with, stories that involve people who are alive right now and could easily be identified.
mhm,
But yeah, I don't know what to do with me except just be completely honest and see
mhm,
if the people who are trusting me with their stories still want to trust me with their stories.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think you touched on a couple of things that I want to jump back to. And the first one is what we would refer to as the ethical storytelling of our experience. So ethical storytelling, really kind of the purpose of even people teaching on this, because it's something you can Google, you can look up, you can get trained on. The point is, let's tell our stories in a way that is respectful of the people our stories are going to implicate. So, for example, when I was going to publicly step forward with what my experience has been, I knew by default anyone who knew my brother was going to be, they were going to know more about his life than maybe he had chosen to tell them.
Mhm.
And so I reached out to him beforehand to begin with, just to give an example of what this could look like. And we were relationally in a place where I could say, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing this." And, any mutual friends we have on social media, anyone who just happens to come across this, maybe people who worked with our mom. I mean, who knows where this could go over time. I want to make sure that you are aware. And at the same time, I do feel like I need to do it. So what would this look like for you? What kind of agreement, can we come to? And first, fortunately, this made it easier. He was very supportive. He's like, absolutely, this is also your story. So go do what you believe you need to do. And if you are skilled and trained and positioned to be able to help other people, I would never want to get in the way of that. At the same time, I don't want my name brought up. I don't ever want to be interviewed. I don't want to tell mine from my perspective. I don't want my family involved. And so just maintaining that privacy in those ways. And that's worked great. No issues to date. But I am very cautious that I'm not overall bringing in specific examples. I tell my example. Now, there are stories I tell where maybe he was there, or maybe someone else was there, maybe a friend was there, but I don't bring them into it. I tell stories as if it's just me intentionally. And that's part of how this looks for me in my journey and in speaking publicly. And so, Anna, I'm curious, what do you think of that, and how does this maybe apply to your life and how you discuss versus not discuss?
Yeah, because our concern, as you pointed out, we care about not only the people who are in it who may not want to share their stories, but also as clinicians too, we know that we care just as much about the clients in front of us as they are right now,
Mhm,
as the client who's 30 years in the future. And we're making sure that we're making decisions about how transparent publicly we are with things, because it's an
mhm,
entirely different platform and everybody has a podcast now, right?
mhm.
So
Yeah.
is this something that like are we going to make a misstep? How much guarding do we really need to do versus the beauty of telling your story, which is something we must do.
Mm,
That's the whole feature of healing, is being able
mhm,
to step into and embody the fact that these experiences were real and that you weren't making them up and they
mhm,
are not crazy. And having
mhm,
that affirmation. So it's a bit of a dance. The only
mhm,
way I know how to do this is to take it on a case by case basis. And so for me, you get little bits of my story if you ask, or if it's pertinent in order for me to establish that I understand what's going on, and
mhm,
I'm going to press a little bit further on a really specific issue so they can understand I'm not prodding for no reason. We're
mhm,
camping for a moment on this for a very specific reason, and I'm going
mhm,
to use myself as the example of where
mhm,
I failed in the past or something that I
mhm,
regret, something like that. So I try to use myself as an example in order to do that. But because of the way that my life has gone about, and you know a bit about this too, being someone who was a very well known individual in the community
mhm.
that also was dealing with coercion means that it doesn't take very long to put together the people I'm referencing for
Right.
the people who are there. And now
Mhm,
that you and I are public figures, that's another element that's difficult because we're speaking internationally on this material,
mhm.
and our references are easily figured out, if that makes sense. So I do my best to I remove names because I don't have the luxury of being able to communicate with the people that I need to communicate with for a
Mhm,
multitude of reasons. um, and people who have left really really damaging groups um, can do that. I mean, at one point I was labeled a demon, and
mhm,
so my ability to communicate by that point forward was actually a negative, even if I was telling the truth, because it was
mhm,
doing the opposite of what I was trying to elicit in the group that I was trying to serve.
mhm.
So there's that complication. I mean, we all know what that looks like,
Right.
where we have third party spirits attached to us in some of these deliverance groups, for example, and all of a sudden you can't speak truthfully at all because it's
Right.
doing a bunch of harm that you never intended. I mean,
Mhm,
all of these things really matter. So the way that I navigate this is I pray a lot, and I
mhm,
try to be mindful and set my mind on what will future Anna be happy that Anna now did
Mm.
on behalf of the people who I care about who are still in the group. Or, and in my case, I have several who are out of the group now, but very painfully.
Mm.
How can I serve 30 years from now them who might be coming back to Christianity and judging it based on my demeanor and decorum when I could have had a very good reason to use lots of details, but I
Mm.
chose not to. And they
Right.
knew that and can see it. That's what I want. I want
Mhm.
to come back and see Jesus and not get wounded.
Right. Right. I say regularly to myself, and I've certainly said it to other people in similar situations, like, it's not over till it's over.
Right.
So, where someone is right now, as much as we could say we cannot in a million years imagine this being different. Like, it would take a lightning bolt from heaven. It would take a God showing up in the flesh again. It would take, where it could feel like there's just like it would have to be a miracle. We've seen those miracles happen. And we
Yeah.
have seen, I mean, it is shocking at times what breaks the camel's back, where it's like, "Oh my goodness," because we don't know what someone is maybe there's that saying of, like, "Put it on the shelf." Well, we don't know how much weight is on that shelf and what it's gonna take for that shelf to finally break, and they're like, "You know what? Like, I just can't anymore. I can't do this anymore." I recently had a conversation with someone where that was the case. I was very surprised by, wow, that's what it was for them. No one would have ever known. So if someone was trying to help get that person to make an exit and they were having those conversations, not that we don't do that, we do. Um, but sometimes we're really surprised by what that point was for them, what that sticking point's going to be. So
Right.
again, we don't want to write anyone off. We don't want to assume that, well, that's a done deal, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to speak about a person or about a group in a way that is making them stay stuck there, or at least in my mind, I'm communicating about them in a way that shows I think they're gonna stay stuck there. I don't believe that about anyone.
Right.
I'm very hopeful that anyone and everyone can make a change, just like, thank God I was able to make a change. I'm not more special than anybody else. We're all made in God's image. We all have some, I don't wanna get into a potential theological realm, but, we have an opportunity to make a different choice potentially, and I wanna remember that, and I wanna treat everyone with that in the forefront of my mind.
Well,
So
and if you're seeking reconciliation too, you don't want to accidentally imply that there's some punitive circumstance that they have to go through in order
mhm,
to actually heal and exit that's
mhm,
keeping them there. Like
mhm,
this is a prodigal type scenario where there's no punishment. The Lord didn't punish me when he
mhm,
forgave everything that I've done wrong. Right? And
mhm,
still actively do. Like this, you who I'm referencing all those things, who may be watching in the future or maybe not. When they do, they need to see the invitation and the fact that
mhm,
reconciliation does not mean necessarily rehashing everything that happened. It doesn't need to be that way unless you want it to be that way. And the invitation is, I will serve you. You don't have to do that.
yeah, yeah, and the reality is there are people that I love, and it hurts
Mhm.
that they're a part of it. It hurts. So, if I were to just start sharing all of these details and all this information, it wouldn't even be the full picture. 'Cause the full picture is, no, I'm heartbroken, and I love them, and I miss them, and I know what they're bound up in, and I don't want that for them. I
Mhm.
want true freedom in Christ for them, and
Mhm.
so it's not I think it's a caution for those of us who maybe come out of a high control group, and we're wanting to start talking quickly, and I run into that, people they wanna share their stories, and it's a beautiful thing to do. And yet at the same time, there's maybe wisdom in the timing of when. First, so that we have a better understanding of what our story is to tell, because that can take some time. And then how do we want to tell it? And again, considering ethical storytelling, how do I want to tell it so that, like you said, my future self looks back and is like, whew, I'm glad I did it that way
Right.
because these people were listening.
Right. Exactly, and just the pragmatic aspect to this is that there are only so many hours in the day, and we do really wanna serve you, otherwise we wouldn't be doing what we're doing
Mhm.
with Be Emboldened. So I'm not going to naturally take up time that to talk about myself
Mhm.
when I can be serving you when we need to hear about what's going on. So you're more than invited to ask me, but I'm going to make sure that
Mhm.
I'm very guarded because it's already unethical in my mind to be taking up someone else's time unless it's absolutely necessary when they're there to talk to someone for healing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know we're kind of going in a couple different directions as we're
Yeah.
talking, like kind of so for those of you who are listening and you're thinking, yeah, like I want to tell my story, knowing what is your story. Do you have clarity around what it is and what the message is that you have to tell and how you want to tell it? So, different things to consider and to think about is something that I love kind of coaching people on and having conversations about it because, again, I think there's so much value in individuals telling their stories in the timing that's going to be really, truly in the best interest of them and their group because sometimes it's just not a good time
Yeah.
because really it can worsen the situation. And so I think there can be wisdom there as well. So, and I think that's something you're speaking to is not necessarily wise for some of us to just come forward and say everything because of the fallout that it would cause. We want to, as support professionals, hopefully as human beings, our goal is to do no harm. So we're not wanting to cause harm, right? We're
Ex-
wanting to help support through harm. We're not
ex-
wanting to cause it.
Correct. We're healers. Like we're not any type of wounds that we're looking to make are structured, right? Healing's multivariate. Sometimes getting smacked in the face with reality is absolutely painful and not because anyone actually smacked you in the face.
Mhm.
So if we are going to go into the depths of emotional baggage and all of the complications of the how communicating as a human is impossible to navigate sometimes and who said what when and all those like those are all really important details and we have to talk about them, but they're
Mhm.
also exhausting. And
Mhm.
grief and healing from grief is multivariate. Everybody does not respond the same way, and so being aware of the fact that we're not there's no standard by which we're judging your healing either, um,
Right.
is really
Right.
important to remember as we as you tackle something, the person who's coming to be emboldened, for example, as you tackle your own story, because we're discovering it with you.
Mhm. Yeah, and absolutely speaking to the other part that you were mentioning, we we want to share to the degree in which it's gonna help you understand your story. It's gonna maybe give you a point of reference. It's gonna help bring more clarity, not to the point where I don't need to tell my story, I've already done it. Like, I don't and we get to that point, right, where I don't really need to share mine because I'm in a place with mine where, like, I'm okay. Now that doesn't mean I don't ever have a trigger or something doesn't come up and I don't have a sad day. That certainly happens. That's a part of day-to-day life. But I'm not needing to process what happened. I have a really good footing on what that was. And so there isn't a need to do that with someone. If there were, I would go see my therapist and have that conversation
Yeah, that's
or my husband or whomever it happens to be depending on the topic. So for those of you who are coming, there is storytelling that will happen. There is some sharing that will happen, but very much as it relates to you. And that's a question that we always have to ask ourselves as professionals. In fact, it's something that we're trained in is if we're going to self disclose, if we're going to tell something about ourselves, is it for the benefit of the other person or is it meeting some need that I have? If it's meeting a need that I have, it's inappropriate.
exactly, exactly.
Um, So, when we're talking about all of these, I think there's some sense of like best practice. But I'm curious if there's any decisions you've made that you would say maybe fall into a different category of, I think this is just what works best for me in my personal situation, my personal connection with the mission of Be Emboldened.
So kind of because you develop kind of mannerisms based on the types of individuals who see Be Emboldened and go, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I need. And so it's one of them is the establishing of, how do I say, an invitation to talk about theology more than they would feel comfortable doing in any other scenario where you might get a mentorship. And so it's only an invitation, but a lot of times what happens is that I can ask you, do you want to talk about the state of your spirit? And
Mhm.
so it moves into an existential conversation. And existential therapies are not normally something that someone trained in this field would jump into immediately. Whereas, because of the types of clients that come to be emboldened and the types of trauma that are normally and happen all the time, looking for that kind of care, I can go
Mhm.
straight there. So I wouldn't call it best practice automatically,
Mhm.
but simply because of a knowledge of the context of why be emboldened is special,
Mhm.
I can go straight to an existential question in order to invite that type of conversation if it's needed. And I have found in almost every case the relief on their face that this is going to be a part of how they can talk to me, is a part of the healing process. And I'm so
Mhm.
pleased to provide it.
Mhm. Yes. Yes, and it is there are so many aspects of experience religious abuse that is difficult to connect with someone on. They're
Mhm,
just there it is. It's a particular area, and we use the word nuance. We say that it's nuanced, and it is something that people can absolutely learn more on. Like you said, they can look at research and they can learn some of these what we would maybe consider best practices. And again, we offer consulting. We're happy to teach more about those
mhm,
because there are certain ways that we can handle a conversation, like you're saying, that enables that person to know, okay, there's a sense of knowing here, like they understand in a way that maybe I haven't found before. And that's going to enable people to realize, okay, this is a safe conversation.
mhm.
This is going to be a safe conversation. I'm not really worried about being misunderstood and being judged for it in this
Correct.
conversation.
Yeah, there is no part of your experience that is going to be dismissed when you meet with me.
Mhm.
So it
Mhm.
doesn't mean we have to go anywhere. You can be invited,
Mhm.
but the point is that you can go anywhere. And so I will put out the invitation simply because it is so rare to be in an environment where the person in front of you is offering that as an option.
Mhm.
Normally, I don't know if you experience this in other contexts, but I've experienced where the existential level and the spiritual level is dismissed as something that doesn't need to be addressed.
Mhm.
We're going to focus on the behavioral level. We're going to
Mhm.
focus only on the cognitive level. And that isn't always what the person in front of me needs. And so
Mhm.
if we are service oriented and if we're actually interested in healing, then we do the healing at the level that the person needs. So that's
Mhm.
very important that they know we can, just because you left a group that is high control and they used things to control you doesn't mean those tools automatically must be dismissed as irrelevant. You can
Mhm.
take some of them with you. As you and I know, the Bible is abused all the time, as an
Mhm.
example.
Right.
Very often, individuals have no interest in tossing the scriptures out
Mhm.
along with the things they are rejecting from the group,
Mhm.
but they also don't know how to talk to the people outside of the group about wanting to maintain them,
Right. Right. And they don't really know necessarily what they mean and what to do with them, but they're open and they're curious and they're hopeful.
or what it means to wield the Bible in a way that is not coercive.
Mhm.
What does it mean to be free
Right.
in a Christian sense?
Yeah.
Really? Yeah.
Mhm. So, with you being licensed in the state of Tennessee
Mhm.
and mentoring as well for Be Emboldened, how would you describe that distinction between meeting with someone as a therapist and meeting with someone as a mentor?
Yeah. That one's a lot easier. So with meeting with somebody as a mentor, I will stop when it enters into a clinical therapy mode, which means I'm taking you through some type of structured, for the purpose of healing, poking at a nerve in your mind kind of thing, rebuilding circuits, talking to you about how your diet can grow neurons. What exactly are we going to do? Potentially causing um, that wielding, that surgical, that brain surgery type
Mhm.
material. Um, I will stay away from that when I am mentoring. And what I can do is I can say, here's what's out there. So there's a lot of psychoeducation.
Mhm.
Here are some options for you. If you already have a therapist, you can ask for augmented cognitive processing therapy, and I can talk to you about those things, but I will not actually take the person through the therapy when
Mhm.
they're in sessions with me. So that one is a pretty firm line for me.
Mhm.
I will not do clinical practice when I am mentoring, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions as far as education is concerned.
Mhm. Yes, absolutely. And same, I want to share that I asked Anna to join me for this conversation so we could talk more about what mentoring does look like for Be Emboldened. What she is saying is across the board. So for myself, for Josh as well, there is that clinical line of we wouldn't diagnose either.
Correct.
Now knowing if there's a diagnosis can be helpful. We appreciate knowing that information. It is on our intake form. We do ask questions like that just to get a handle because we want to make sure that you're getting supported in the best way possible. And so if there's certain things going on where it might be best to collaborate and have a therapist as well, psychiatrist as well, depending on what's going on, maybe an MD involved, we are happy to collaborate and make those suggestions because again, we want to make sure that you are getting the best supports. And depending, we may not be it. We also recognize that. So again, we want to ask those questions so we can get you connected the best way.
Exactly.
Yeah. Overall, as we wrap up, what is your general philosophy of mentoring? And along with that, what would you view as your strengths in this role?
Oh, wow. Philosophy of mentoring is, as far as I'm concerned, is to make certain I'm anticipating as many objections as I possibly can, having been out of a coercive control group for as long as I have and
Mhm.
having navigated a lot of those minefields already. So, one of my strengths is the question, have you considered? And then fill in the blank.
Mhm.
And that has been really, really helpful in a lot of the lives of the people that I've been serving lately. Um, Coming out of things like the New Apostolic Reformation, for example,
Mhm. Mhm.
there are a lot of things that I can anticipate with that because I know
Mhm.
the theology so well. So I can, hey, have you anticipated this? Hey, do you know how to look into a community church and be able to tell whether or not it's that theology again? And how do you navigate something that, it's the same language but two different dictionaries?
Right.
And having analogies in order to understand and how to articulate really difficult theological content to other individuals so that you can explain what happened to you. Um,
Mhm.
because I've been doing this for as long as I have, and because I've been an apologist formally for 15 years, I have a lot of that material in my wheelhouse. And so
Mhm.
you can tell me, what do you need? And I can normally provide it.
Mhm.
Or at the very least, I know somebody who can if I don't know the
Yes.
answer. Yeah.
Yes, which makes you an excellent resource as well for getting further education, for people to increase their understanding, for them to be able to do some homework, some reading, some investigating. And I love what you said about that anticipating because you're absolutely right. There are certain things we hear where we just kind of know, okay, now I don't want to put someone in a box because it's not necessarily cookie cutter, but
Mhm.
there's a good chance that this, and this may be something to talk about. These
Well,
may be some priorities. So let me start to ask those questions and find out.
and being able to read between the lines about things that have happened and fears that are probably cooking under the surface that they're too afraid to ask and
Mhm.
maybe find out the answer to, if when they've been subjected to things that are extremely emotionally damaging, like sozo sessions, for example,
Mhm.
and the fears that I know that go along with that once you've exited that you haven't even gotten up the nerve to ask yourself about yet, to
Right.
be able to invite and go, no, it's okay, let me tell you about this scenario and why, just in case you're worried about this.
Mhm.
I can go ahead and comfort you in that way. And then to watch the relief erupt that I've never been able to talk to anybody about that. And I've been so
Mhm.
afraid. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm happy
Yes.
to do that.
Anna, I'm just so thankful that you're a part of Be Emboldened. And I mean that. I tell
I'm glad
people
to hear
when I have initial consultation with someone, sometimes people will think, because I do the initial consult, they'll say, "Okay, I'm gonna meet with Naomi," and so I'm very quick to let them know, like, I have that initial conversation to kinda see who would be the best fit. I wanna make sure that we're, knowing your personality, knowing Josh's personality, knowing mine, also knowing schedules, availability, all of that, like, okay, what would be the best here? What am I assessing is best for this person? And sometimes people are like, "Oh, well, I thought it'd be you because, my face is all over beEmboldened as the founder and the executive director," and I'm like, you are not losing out if you meet with if you're meeting with someone other than me. I am not better than Anna. I am not better than, and like this is gonna be an excellent match. And every single time I get an email back saying, "Oh my gosh, she
No,
is amazing. Thank you so
good,
much."
good. I'm glad.
So it's just nothing feels better for me in my role with beEmboldened than to be able to connect someone with a person who I know is gonna care for them well, is gonna love them well, is gonna have integrity in what they're doing, and is just gonna give them everything that they can, again, with these best practices in mind, and I know that I have that, and I'm just so appreciative. So thank
Oh,
you. Thank you for being a part of this team, and thank you for all of the rebuilding that you're encouraging with people that you're connecting with. It's a gift to them and it's a gift to beEmboldened. It's a gift to this work. So
that's
thank
my
you.
very great privilege, and I'm happy to do it. Thanks for the invitation.